Daniel Elder, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's very lovely to be here with you, Rabbi Josh.
It's really fun. It's been too long. There are, when I interview Art Lab artists, I'm always reminded of how much I love being in the cohort and being able to see folks at least monthly. So anyway, it's great to see you. And I wanted to start by talking to you a little bit about your writing. You do both fiction and nonfiction. And I want to talk about your nonfiction because that's kind of how I came to know you, I guess, or to know your work initially. And you write in a very self-revelatory, I don't know if memoir is the right word, because memoirs tend to be fuller works, but a lot of self-exploration and self-revelation. And I wanted to talk to you first about whether that is difficult for you. I mean, to say that your writing is personal is an understatement, but to know that you're writing something so very personal. I mean, you write about stuff that a lot of people keep secret.
Yeah, I'm much more comfortable in nonfiction. I do write some fiction. I have written less fiction. I'm much more confident in nonfiction because fiction is where my energy is right now, but it stresses me out because I have to come up with everything from whole cloth, And it's like with nonfiction, the story's there and I can just dive into it. Not that I'm always telling the story, I'm telling my version of the story. And that's, if it's hard, I'm an exhibitionist, I think. And I think I like to talk about myself, and I have tons of close friends and I don't have many acquaintances because I think I like to really get in it with people and open up. And especially, I have this little baby right now and I feel like I'm very aware of how little time I have left on earth. I don't have time to waste, So it comes.
You don't want to like talk about the weather with people, and you don't want to write about how lovely that sunset was.
Not really, or only if it's serving something a little meatier. And when I moved to Portland just about exactly 10 years ago last month, I wanted to work on fiction, and I wound up taking this writing workshop. A friend told me I should go work with this writer named Lydia Yuknovich, who's like a very famous Oregon writer, and she changed my life and has become a mentor to me. And I started writing about my terrible relationship with my father in this weekend workshop with her, and all this stuff just came out, and it was really, raw, and I liked it. And then
so hold on. So is that because I actually did want to talk to you about your work with her and her organization in the corporeal
writing,
because that sense of body comes through in your work, and I did want to talk about that. But so was it when you came to Oregon and started working with her that you got to this kind of self-revelatory style?
Yeah, before that I was kind of putzing around, I would say, and writing some fun little fictional short stories, and I exist very much in my head. I don't consider myself someone who's in touch with their body very much, and through the practices that I engaged in these workshops with her, I was really getting in touch with stuff that I was holding in my body, a lot of unprocessed stuff. And it was really cathartic to write about it. Sharing it is something that I enjoy, but it is such an anxiety-inducing experience.
I can imagine, yeah.
So the thing that I'm probably the most proud of that I've written was, I think something I may have submitted to Art Lab when I was applying. It's called Ugly Boys, and it's really about queerness in my life and my relationship to men throughout my life, both friendships and sexual relationships, and putting that and my relationship to my current partner, who's not a man, and it's all in there, putting that out there. The day that got published, I mean, those days are always, I'm nauseous for like 48 hours,
But let me ask, so nauseous about, because a lot of the times writers are very nervous because, you're putting your work out there and other writers are going to look at the work and evaluate the work. But you then have the additional layer of, even if they like the work and think it's great, I've really put my own personal secrets. Well, maybe I shouldn't call them secrets, whatever you want to call them, hidden dimensions of my life out on view. So you have the additional level of nausea.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I feel so naked, and I'm an exhibitionist, so I enjoy it, but it's also terrifying because nakedness is inherently a state of vulnerability, and suddenly it's like your soft belly's been exposed.
Why do you think why do you think you are drawn to that? I mean, it maybe one could say it's a universal thing. Everybody has some desire to be seen and naked on some primal level, but not everybody really goes for it. Why do you ever thought about why you have that? Why you do that?
I think despite all my loving friendships that I just described and my loving relationship, I think I've always, from a long time ago, had this pretty deep sense of loneliness that I just carry around with me all the time, and like a heavy sort of sadness. And I remember having this thought once on a late night subway ride in New York. The closer I get to everyone, the closer I get to anyone, the further I feel from everyone. As if like the closer I get with people and the more love there is in my life, the more I become aware that I'm just, alone in this body and no one can know what's going on in here. And, I think it's sort of this like desperate want to just lay it out there in the hopes that maybe someone might know what it's like. I don't know.
I so appreciate you exploring this with me. It always interests me when people want to go to, the deepest places. Why do you, so there you have this like not push pull, but this paradoxical experience you've said where paradox is my word, not yours, where like the closer you, how did you put it? The closer you get to people, the more aware you are of your loneliness.
Yeah. The closer I get to anyone, the further I feel from everyone. And that was the exact thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that because as you get close to someone, one realizes that, well, ultimately, even this person who I'm so close to doesn't really know me on the deepest level. Is it that, or why?
It's just like the irreconcilable existing in different bodies and like,
Yes.
and wanting some sort of more profound merging that, sometimes altered states of consciousness can sort of make you feel you're achieving, or even just like whether through substances or like, just, my partner and I, we have what we call dance parties every once in a while. And the two of us dance together until like with complete abandon. I mean, with ultimate freak dancing until we're just completely covered in sweat. And that's actually some of the times that I feel the closest, like I've achieved, but otherwise it's like, it's like I'm here in my body and then one day I'm going to die. Like, what a terrible thing.
Yeah. That could be the name of your next book. I'm here in my body and then I'm going to die. That's the summary of that could be a great Hallmark card. That could be give it to somebody for their birthday. I love to tell this. So in the book of Genesis, there are two stories about the creation of human beings. And with this, what I'm about to share comes from Joseph Soloveitchik's book, Lonely Man of Faith. And in it, he points out that in one of the stories, Adam is created alone, like God just makes Adam. And in the other story, there's an emphasis on how Adam and Eve are created as a single being. And he uses that as a way to talk about these two dimensions of our humanity. And in one, we stand totally alone before God. And there's an existential loneliness, but it's also one that's filled with opportunity because you're becoming who you're becoming. And then in the other dimension of ourselves is one that's fundamentally relational because we're created with other human beings. Wholeness can only be with other human beings. Why do you think you work in this way with your writing? You've always had the sense of loneliness and you're always drawn to trying to share who you are. Is that the upshot?
I think so, yeah. But, it's interesting. I always wonder, like, what my family would say about that. Like, when did that sense of loneliness come in, Because I also know that as a child, my mother, who I write about a lot and who passed, oh my God, coming up on 8 years now, she would always say, oh, like as a kid, you were just lost in your imagination, just writing all these stories with your toys and I could just leave you alone and with your action figures just for hours and you were making up all these stories, So that doesn't sound lonely. And I don't know. And when I see video of myself as a kid, I think there was a real joyousness. So there was maybe an impulse to always tell stories earlier. And then maybe, when my parents were divorcing and I was an angsty teen listening to Marilyn Manson and wearing a trench coat, maybe that's when the loneliness sort of came in, but it never really left, There's
a particular image was very beautiful in one of your works. And of course, one of your your essays, and you'll know what it is. And I don't remember which one, but you referred to your childhood and I think you didn't want to wear clothes and you're like naked and it sounds like you're like quite young, like a toddler, and your parents are asking you a question, and you're not answering them, but you're just saying your name over and over, Daniel, and quite joyously was my sense. But to me, there was this beautiful moment of like familial connection. You're naked and they're taking joy in you and you're dancing around, but they also couldn't reach you. They're trying to engage you, and you're just like, Daniel.
Well, I just had this whole conversation with my sister about that time in my life, and my parents were really concerned about my refusal to wear clothes. Like, it almost came to like child therapy. I really refused. So maybe that's something I need to write into a bit.
Well, so maybe we can use that as a way to talk about the corporeal writing, because and maybe first you can just like tell folks what it is in like the elevator pitch 30-second thing. And then because you write a lot about your body and that kind of nakedness, one would imagine, like when you were little and they couldn't get you to put on clothes, that would suggest a great deal of comfort with your body, but you write a lot about discomfort with it. So I don't know if we can go into that or not, but tell us a little bit about this approach to writing that was so powerful for you.
Yeah. Lydia Yuknovich, an incredible writer, and she and her colleague, Dami Shoemaker, created this organization, Corporeal Writing, and we offer, I was going to the workshops a lot for like a couple of years, and now I've worked with them for many years, 5 or 6 years. And we offer writing workshops. We like to call them creative labs that are offering like non-traditional approaches to the writing workshop. And we're not trying to tell anybody how to do anything, but instead of calling them writing prompts, we call them portals, because a prompt feels like a kick in the ass, whereas a portal is like just like a door being open and you can go through it and you can find whatever you want there.
Oh, that's great.
And Lydia feels really strongly that your body itself has a point of view. Every part of your body has a point of view, and that a lot of times I think writers sit around like, well, how do I write about this? And it's sort of the idea is that like, actually it's all in here if you just sort of, root down and get in touch with it, which I have to tell you, I would keep going to these workshops. I would resist it. And I'd be like, no, I don't want to get in touch with my body. And that is, I really love you reflecting that back to me, that I was really joyous about my body at a certain point in this time of nakedness in my youth. And how did I get from there to this place where now I always feel like I'm sort of in a battle? I've come to a deeper place of love with my body. For a long time, there's been hatred. I think a lot of that was being raised by a man who only was invested in traditional masculinity. And I just had nobody to explain what being queer was to me at all for a really long time in my life. And so I just felt like I was doing something wrong, I think,
Yeah, right. And you also write about that relationship that seems to be very important to your work and to who you are, what you've learned, reflected, and rejected from that relationship with your dad. But so in what way does the body have a perspective? Like, how does my shoulder have a perspective? What does
think
that
about
mean?
Think about like an injury that you've had that just like really bothers you, a lot of what we do at Corporeal is asking people questions that just get them out of their comfort zone. And so you have this story. Okay, I'll make it about me. I have this story. I don't know if I know you read some of my work to refamiliarize yourself ahead of this. And the very first piece of nonfiction I wrote was in a workshop that was called Shoulder Blades.
I love that story. Yeah.
And I just had this story about my
and that story is very much about your dad. I mean, it's
and my body. She had us do this sort of body scan meditation, and what part of your body right now is calling your attention. And it was my fucking shoulder. And then she was like, well, what is the story you tell about your shoulder? And then what is the story your shoulder?
So hold on. She said, when you said my shoulder, it didn't have any larger significance. It was your shoulder hurt or something, or
it just my shoulder has always bothered me. And I had that experience that I write about in that piece of this massage that I got, and realizing that I hold some of my dad's stuff, but I had never, that I had that experience and then I memory hold it, and then I like never really processed it. And she really invited me to dig in there. And
Wow.
then all this other stuff about my shoulder started coming up. And it was like, oh, this is almost like a motif, And finding a motif is a really like liberating thing as a writer, and even just like you can ask like a simple question of a writer, like something comes up for them around their knee. Well, then it's like, well, pick a few different ages and like what was going on with your knee at those different ages. And like then you're like, oh, this is stupid. I don't want to do this. And then you're like, oh, but then that thing happened when I was a kid. And sometimes it's just a doorway into it's like tilt shift photography, where in tilt shift photography, it's like famously used in the opening credit sequence of The Social Network, of the circus. And it's like, rather than focusing on the object, you're focusing on the air. The lens is focusing on the air between the object and the lens. And so everything just looks a little off.
Interesting. Okay.
And you can just kind of approach things from a little bit of a new angle.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And so you work for this organization.
Yeah, I'm like the administrator. But I also teach. We do weekend long intensive workshops where we all take turns running the group of 20 to 25 writers through doing different writing exercises. And then I teach an online class once a year called Cartography with a Q, that is like for queer writers who want to write memoir.
I see. So one of the things that I thought about in relationship to corporeal writing is your writing also has, for the careful reader, notes of your Jewishness. I think some of your work is very clearly and explicitly Jewish, but even the works that are not Jewish works, Jewish pieces per se, will have like a single line reference to the Kaddish or, some other thing in the text. One of the things that people have said about Jewish culture, a lot of I think younger people have reacted, I don't want to say against, but have observed about their Jewish upbringings that it was so cerebral and people are so hungry for like an embodied, in this day and age, like you hear this phrase, like embodied experience.
Yeah.
Is there something about Jewishness in your experience, or Jewish writing or Jewish work, that's just all in the head?
I mean, I think so, and I feel like that's I grew up, my parents were, I would think they would self-describe as intellectuals, and they kind of, my dad was into physical activity. I wasn't, but I feel like we were all really like head people. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I could say that about Jewishness for everyone, but that was my experience.
Sure.
And I think I was hungry for something a little more embodied. And so the nice thing about writing in this way is I feel like I get both.
Yes. Right. What does it mean for a culture that's so steeped in the intellectual to have a generation of Jewish artists emerging who, in many cases, are searching for more embodied experience? There's Jewish yoga, and there's other folks who are, trying to reconnect. And like there was this sense of both for men and women, of wanting to really reconnect to the earth and the body and show strength and vitality while still honoring the kind of intellectual tradition. So anyway, that's part of the culture as well. But how do you think of yourself as a Jewish writer?
I think I did before Art Lab. Art Lab, it was a really interesting time in my life because my mom passed in 2017, and I immediately, I was raised completely secular. I was in a synagogue maybe 3 times in my life as for most of my life, bar mitzvahs. And we went to Yom Kippur once. I have like a vague memory of hearing the shofar from like a seat in the nosebleeds. And, but as soon as my mom died.
Sorry, and where would that have been?
That's in New York City. So I grew up in Queens, in New York City.
Yeah, okay.
And, but we did the holidays, but, I think I only went through a Haggadah once at Passover, with my cousin who did go to a Solomon Schechter, school. But otherwise, we just, and we ate whatever we wanted, Anyway, so we would do the holidays just sort of. My parents were from the Soviet Union, and my dad didn't really care about being Jewish. Like, He really didn't. He would rather celebrate Christmas. And when my parents split, that's what he did. And but to my mom, being Jewish was like the thing. It was like the most important thing. And I think what had happened was the Soviet Union had stamped through just brutality the religion out of my family, but not the ethnic identity.
Sure.
And so they came over here. My grandma was very superstitious, but she didn't believe in God. Mom was an atheist, and she kind of raised us in this sort of atheist. Anyway, all to say, my mom died, and I immediately just sort of found myself, I had gone to Torah study here in town a couple of times at Shir Tikva, and I reached out to the Rabbi Stone, who just retired, and that just sort of, I would go once in a while. And then in 2023, I turned 40 in June. And I felt like a cliche. I was like, 40-year-old man turns 40, Jewish man turns 40, decides he wants to be more Jewish. And so
right. It's a story that's been told before.
And so I enrolled in Shir Tikva, and I started going more often. And I started I'm not wearing it right now, but I started wearing dangly Magen David earring, which was my way of being a Jewish George Michael. And I started being visibly Jewish, and thinking about being Jewish became more important to me. And that was when I saw Art Lab was happening, and I thought, oh, I'm going to apply to this. And then our first meeting was like a week after October 7th.
Yep.
Well, all of it kind of,
That's right.
And so obviously, ever since October 7th, questions of, like, what does being Jewish mean to me? What does being Jewish mean right now? Have been pretty prominent. And so Art Lab was sort of like a crucible. Sounds bad. But like a crucible sounds like, trying, but it was like a container through which I could feel into. And, I wrote this piece.
A kiln. How about that? A kiln.
Yeah, a kiln. And I wrote this piece that was just for our art show that we did that right now doesn't exist anywhere else. It's just a spoken word piece that I have a recording of. But I had been working on this memoir about my mom's death, and that was my most and is my most explicitly Jewish work. You haven't read it because it just, it hasn't been published yet.
Yeah.
Not for lack of trying. And, but it has made me revisit that, and wanting to actually just like amplify the Jewish aspects of it. And the project that I'm working on now, I'm sort of hedging and saying working on now because I'm being so lazy about it, is very Jewish. And I feel like that wouldn't have happened without Art Lab. And I find that in my applications to things, when I'm applying for, a fellowship or something, I do describe myself as a Jewish writer, not without some hesitation, because like, I don't know what that's going to mean to somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I do want to talk about that. So it's, you brought something to that you wanted to amplify, this Jewishness in your work. So why do you think at this moment, what was it, your mom's passing, or was it what's in the air, or was it just something internal? Like, why lean into the Jewishness in this recent work?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that question. I don't know that I've asked myself that. I think, well, one thing I have reflected on, my mom died, and 13 months later, her mom died at age 99. And that was my grandma, Hannah, who was a survivor of the siege of Leningrad.
Your grandma died after your mom?
Yeah, 13 months later of congestive heart failure. And she spent those 13 months, heartbroken, just totally heartbroken. And but she was just I always call her, she was a tank of a woman. She survived the siege, and she just was so sturdy. And she survived a real horror. And but when each of them died, after my grandma died, I talked to my friend Adam about this. And I said, I don't know if what I'm saying is metaphorical or metaphysical, but I feel like when each of them died, aspects of them had to be like displaced into new containers, who were me and my sisters, and also probably my mom's brother. And so I when my grandma died, I thought, well, now me and my sisters are going to become more stubborn, because my grandma was the most stubborn person ever. And I do think that, for my mom, being Jewish was the thing. And she was obsessed, for better or worse. She was obsessed with anti-Semitism. She was obsessed with Holocaust memory and memory of Soviet Jewry. And she was, really obsessed with Israel. And that we would have a lot of, dining table arguments, because she sometimes, frankly, just like lacked compassion for Palestinians, I think.
Yeah.
But I do think that since she died, that's part of it, is me feeling like I have to take it on more because she isn't here.
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't want to speak for them because they're not here, but my two older sisters, to whom I'm incredibly close, I mean, we text like just an insane amount of times per day. They both, one is a journalist and one is an art historian. They are finding their work even touching on more explicitly Jewish themes.
Wow.
And I think and one thing that's coming up for me right now is Tree of Life happened in 2018, was it?
Yeah.
And when Tree of Life happened,
And just so people know, you're referring to the assault and the killing at the synagogue.
synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, it hit me so much harder than any anti-Semitic incident had hit me before my mom died.
Why do you think?
It almost felt like a wall. It almost felt like she was protecting me by taking all of this on, and now she's gone.
Wow.
And it was hitting me.
Yeah.
And so I find, there's like a greater sensitivity to stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So in ways conscious and unconscious, you think like there is this, like in other words, like the souls of your mom and grandma needed to manifest somewhere. So probably in ways you're not aware of, you're saying they're within you, but then also ways where you were like, wow, I have to carry this now, this awareness of anti-Semitism or whatever. You kind of felt that. And listen, also we're living in times that kind of call on us to be aware of what it's like to be a Jew and the dangers of that with, anti-Semitism, as you're pointing out, it's not just an imaginary thing, right? So even without that part of your personal narrative, without your mom and your grandma passing, I think a lot of Jewish artists have been wanting to find out what it means to be connected and aware and responsible as a Jewish person.
Yeah.
Israel is not an easy topic for any artist. And within Art Lab, there's, I would say, a very broad range of experiences of the war in Israel and opinions about the war.
Can I just interject really quick?
Please.
There was an article in the New York Times recently about how New York City Jews feel about Zoran Mamdani. And there was a quote from an older Jewish woman that my sister sent to me and my other sister. She said, "This is the greatest Jewish quote all the time." That was like, and the woman was like, "I don't agree with anyone about Israel. I don't agree with myself about Israel." After that.
Exactly. Listen, for some people within the Jewish community, talking about Israel is not difficult because right now their emphasis is just on the dangers to Israel, and they're not thinking about the other side of it, or they're not there. In my experience, there are people who simply are not willing to engage the question of what's happening to Palestinians, or if they do engage it, they just say, well, it's Hamas's fault and not Israel's responsibility. But for a lot of people, it's very difficult. It's been very difficult. And I'm going to ask you about what it's like to be an artist in the arts community around these kinds of issues. But it's very difficult for Jewish people right now because we're so Jewish, which is to say so many of us are holding, I don't want to say paradoxical thoughts because that makes it sound like the situation in Israel is morally impossible to solve. Is it hard to be a Jewish artist over the last couple of years because of Israel?
It's interesting. I don't know that the difficulty reaches into my being an artist. I think it's difficult being a Jewish person and a person who's trying to embrace multiple narratives at once. But I don't know that I have really like struggled. I don't know. I'm having trouble with this question.
Okay, fine. Well, but let me. The reason I went there is because you alluded to the second. Maybe I misunderstood what you were saying. There's a work you're trying to get published.
Well, there's my memoir about my mom.
Yeah.
Which was out on submission with a bunch of agents before 2023.
Okay, I thought you had said there was some Jewish work that you're not having success publishing, and I thought you were alluding to the fact that because of what's happening in the world,
No.
I misunderstood.
Yeah, I do find it's just been hard in general, and especially as someone who, God, Israel is so hard to talk about, you know.
Yeah.
But everyone wants to talk about it, especially on social media, and it's just hard. I just, like the people I'm following are the peacemakers on both sides, the people who are working with each other. And those are the people who I listen to. And I think that, I don't know. I think that what we're seeing in Gaza and in the West Bank is a very like natural outcome of the dehumanization of the other. And I do think that Israeli society has like a lot of reckoning to do. And I'm a real big fan of, I don't know if you're familiar with her. I think her name is Nurit Peled Elhanan. And she's an Israeli academic who writes a lot about the racism in the Israeli educational system and all this stuff, you know? And her father was involved in the Oslo Accords. Like she's like kind of from a big Israeli family. But I think what's been hard for me is I think that people are so in their emotions about what's happening that what I see them responding with is dehumanizing Israel and Israelis. It's like that's the only response that they can think of. And yeah, I'm noticing I'm just so anxious talking about all this stuff and being recorded talking about it. You know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's important for us not to resolve the issue, but just to realize that this anxiety tension is just part of what it is to be Jewish in the year 2025, or at least to be somebody who's invested one way or the other in what happens in Israel. Listen, there's no lack of dehumanization to go around on both sides. And,
And it's just, this is a place where I particularly feel lonely, which is I feel sometimes like I'm over here just being like, I support the rights of Jews and Palestinians to both have self-determination, peace, security, and dignity in their ancestral lands.
Yes, right. That sounds pretty reasonable, right?
And it feels scary to say sometimes, you know?
Yeah, because it hasn't been acceptable to say, I think, surprisingly. And you listen, it's so hard to talk about because like, I was about to say something explaining how terrible it is that it's become difficult to say in an unapologetic way. I think Jewish people have a right to live in that part of the world, because as soon as I say that, other people listening, or even the other side of my brain, is like, wait a minute, what about the 60,000 dead Palestinians?
But I actually like
it's so like one of the tangled. Well, go ahead.
One of the big challenges is like to escape binary thinking, and I'm going to try and make this cogent, to hold at the same time that for many Jews, the creation of the state of Israel was like this, miracle, however violent that miracle was. And for the Palestinian people, it was the Nakba.
Right.
And to sit with the discomfort of both of those things, like neither of those stories actually has to triumph over the other. Yes. And we can hold both of those stories while acknowledging that for the last 75 years, there's been a huge disparity in power and privilege between those two groups,
Yes.
But the narratives one doesn't have to win over the other.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's very beautifully, very cogently said, and very clear and very true. And I wanted to tip my hat to you. You said, I just try to follow the peacemakers on each side. And I don't know if this is what you meant by that, but I was saying to my sister the other day that the way I kind of gauge what can be helpful to share and not share publicly on social media is I look to the activists who are there in Israel.
Exactly.
And if there are Israelis who are sharing profound concern, Israelis who have supported the war, who are sharing profound concern about hunger in Gaza and about the number of dead Palestinians, then I'm not going to have some American on the political right telling me that it's outrageous for me to express concern about that. So, and then also the same on the other side.
I feel also like raising a child is, it's just there's so much to do. And
we haven't even talked about the impact of.
Well, and I want to engage in more Jewish practice and Jewish study. I haven't put on tefillin in months, and I was like, I should put it on before I do this podcast this morning, and then I'll be more Jewish for this podcast. But I didn't do it.
Anyway, I just want to say that so much of Talmudic thinking, and it manifests in other sources as well, but is these two ideas that seem irreconcilable that you're trying to hold together at the same time and make sense of. So I just wanted to put that out there. So anyway, to zoom out, what's been happening in the world, the Jewish world, the world of Israel and Palestinians, has been important to you as a human and as a Jewish person, but you haven't wrestled with that so much in your work.
Maybe that's not true, because the project I'm working on now is a novel, and I don't want to say too much about it, but I've been describing it, it's my Jewish, nerdy, kinky, poly novel about a kid.
One of those.
It's about right now I'm focused on the protagonist's childhood, and he's like this little queer Jewish kid who's getting into Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm writing these scenes where, with his mom, especially, who's very Jewish, and his mom, it's kind of fun. I wrote this memoir my memoir is like almost a hagiography. Is that how you pronounce that word? Hagiography of my mom, it kind of deifies my mom. And so the mom in this novel is almost like, what if this mom was the worst in all the ways that my mom was the best, including being very overbearing. Anyway, so there's scenes at shul and with the rabbi and stuff. And I will say that there is a few months ago, a bunch of people in the literary world signed a petition calling for a cultural boycott with Israeli writers, agents, and stuff like that. Yeah. Obviously, I don't necessarily need to worry about that. I'm not an Israeli writer, but I will say that knowledge of that and the idea that, anti-Semitism creeps up in different places. Not that sentiment against Israel is anti-Semitism, but I'm saying like this stuff proliferates. There is a part of me that's like, am I pouring time and effort into something that's going to be ill received? And I really have to just not listen to that. I think it's more irrational than rational, but but it does affect how I'm doing things sometimes.
Well, I don't know if it's irrational or not, but I'll just say that, I've spoken to many artists, Jewish artists, whose work is not explicitly Jewish even, who have expressed concern, anxiety about how their work will be received or how a grant application. But I know there are a lot of Jewish artists who have not created certain kinds of works because right now they feel it's not the time. And we can criticize them and all the rest, but it just is what it is. So that is a thing that happens.
No, I guess, yeah. And there's a character. So I thought of this novel before October 7th or anything. And there's a character who's a pretty major character. And I envision this character as being Israeli. It's kind of important. And
I see.
I do wonder, and I can only write this thing the way it wants to be written.
Right.
And it feels important, but then I also feel like, well, then do I have some responsibility then to weave all that in, and I don't know. I don't know the answer to that,
Yeah. Responsibility to it's actually this is something I want to really talk about. That we stumbled upon.
If I'm bringing this Israeli character into the book, do I have some sort of responsibility to touch on the geopolitics of the region that this character is from in some way without making it? I would, you don't want to feel like you're bludgeoning the reader over the head, in a way that feels organic to the story,
And so we've kind of accidentally stumbled upon this, and I just help me think through, like, how are you thinking about that question of whether you want this Israeli person in the story to somehow tease out these larger thoughts about what's going on in the world?
Well, interesting. So as I watch a lot of people in my life conceptualize Israel as just sort of like a monolith, and I feel very aware that Israel is not a monolith. There's a lot of different people, different perspectives. Then I have to ask myself this question: well, what kind of Israeli is this person? And yeah, and just like, do I feel like I need to find a way to bring in, I'm a little saved by the fact that this book is going to take place like in the mid 2010s, as well as the 1990s. But just like, do I, and I haven't gotten to that point in the book yet. So I don't know.
I don't know why I find this. Well, I do know why I find this so fascinating. This topic of art as being politically engaged or art as being art for art's sake, Because one way of looking at it, I would imagine, and again, I'm not a writer, I'm not an artist, is, well, the story is going to tell me what kind of Israeli there needs to be. And if that Israeli ends up being this, then I'll write about that. And if the story tells me I need this Israeli, then it'll be that kind of person. And maybe, so either these broader sensitivities get articulated or not. But you're saying you, Daniel, need to decide what kind of Israeli you want in there.
I do, and also I think even all art is political, even if you as the artist are like, I'm not engaging, that's a political decision.
Yes.
But yeah, that's just something I need to figure out, and I don't know how I'm going to figure it out. I have some ideas, actually sometimes just talking about it like this, I'm having other ideas about it, which is actually exciting to me.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think another thing I wanted to ask you about is I see that that spirituality or religiosity and art are not distinct departments, even though many artists consider themselves secular. There's a beautiful image you used that really made me want to ask you this, because it was like a very spiritual image that you were writing about, and you wrote about it very evocatively. I think as a rabbi and as somebody who's had a lot of Jewish religious experience, that's why this question of the position of art and the position of the artists matters to me, because I have a bias against self-consciously political work, because I see that sphere, and this is my own bias, as being holy and sacred, like that it should just be its own thing. So maybe it's kind of strange part to kind of bring into the final few minutes of our conversation. Tell me a little bit about that image. And am I right to point to a kind of certain spirituality in your writing? Maybe that's not the right label.
Yeah, I think so. I think I struggled with that word for a long time, but I was raised atheist, and I was really invested in being atheist. I would read the American Atheist newsletter in debate club. My bills would be like, we got to get rid of under God from the pledge. It was a constant thing with me. But also as a child, I would write these short stories about like Jesus's crucifixion and Roman centurions. And I was obsessed with mythology, and I would write stories about mythology. And when I look back, I actually see that I was always drawn to the numinous, even if I wasn't.
Thank you. That's the word that connects the artistic and the sacred. Yes. Sorry. Go ahead.
I love that word. And what was I saying?
You were always drawn to the numinous even as a kid.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, when I took mushrooms for the first time, I sometimes kind of hate talking about psychedelics, but they are a huge part of my, path. When I took them for the first time, I actually was at a really lonely place in my life. And I felt that the whole world was made of language. Everything, the furniture was made of language. The trees were made of language. And I felt this my loneliness temporarily evaporated. And I thought, wow. I'm not the only one. And I think, for me, that is the reason that writing has a spiritual or numinous quality to it. It's like it's not, and sometimes it's not me. Sometimes things come through and you're just like, where did that come from? And I actually consider myself agnostic in a very playful way. I don't actually want to have an answer or decide on an answer of where it came from.
Sure. Yeah. Wow. That's really beautifully said and very powerful. Yeah. So, but anyway, I know. I was sorry. I was going to say, when the whole world is made of language, I mean, as a rabbi, I can't not refer to the book of Genesis. One could make the argument that the distinction between art and religion is really non-existent. One of the ways, and this thought was not original to me, Eric Stern, who I had on as a guest, brought this up, that the Torah it's a bunch of stories. And if you consider that I don't believe the Torah was literally given by God. So these are stories that story makers created. They're works of art. And that's what the Torah is, at least the Genesis narratives. So in other words, these things that we say, no, that's not art, that's religion. Well, what's the difference? These are stories made by artists. And but anyway, the other thing is, when you say the whole world are made of language, we could have a whole separate discussion about the book of Genesis. Like, the world is created through language. And the idea that you said the whole world is made of language is actually resonant with other ancient teachings that says that the world was created out of the Torah, out of the words of the Torah. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Maybe that's a weird and cool place to end. I wish I had another few hours with you because I feel like we've scratched the surface here. But I did want to end with the two questions that I sent you in advance. And one is just to share something you want people to know about. And then the other is to tell us what is the very best Jewish food.
Yeah, something I love right now by an artist who's Jewish, but who I really, before I was like, has he talked about being Jewish? And he hasn't. And he's really more of a Buddhist. Well, not those are exclusive, with a rich history of Jubus. But there's a new album by Jonathan Richman, who is one of my favorite songwriters. It's called Only Frozen Sky Anyway. And he's probably pushing 70 and he's really meditating on his mortality. There's a song, if you haven't listened to it, I don't know if you heard the new album, but there's a song on it that you might appreciate. It's like an ode to his guitar about how when he doesn't know how he feels, his guitar can help him figure it out.
Oh, wow. Great.
There's just like, he has maintained through decades of music making this childlike, not immature, but childlike wonder for the world. And a playfulness that I just find really inspiring. Like he's like, I often think of, I have aging mentor, like role models, like people who I want to age like.
And so he's one of them.
Yeah. And so, in the morning, my partner gets my partner's, nursing. And so she gets some extra sleep. I take the baby in the morning and I go down to the kitchen and I make breakfast while I hang out with her. I sit her on the floor and I play her music. And lately, every day I play her this Jonathan Richman album.
Oh, that's so great.
And she really likes something. She does this. She just wiggles.
Right.
And she just
that's such a beautiful image. I bet Jonathan Richman would love that. I'm glad. Tell me the name of the album.
Only Frozen Sky Anyway.
So I'm glad you mentioned that because I will go back to it. I fell so in love with Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers. That album meant so much to me and was so important part of my youth.
Yeah.
And that when I heard later Jonathan Richman, it was like too playful for me. I was like, in a way that was very unfair to him. It was like, I wanted him to be the same artist that had made that album. So I will go back on your recommendation and listen to it.
If you listen to only one song on this new album, listen to Older Girl. It's a song about him being 14 and having a crush on a 15-year-old girl. Yeah. And it's perfect.
Oh, great. Okay. Daniel Elder, what is the best Jewish food?
You look so stressed. I am stressed. The thing is, I don't think it's an exclusively Jewish food, but I think halva might be like the ultimate. Like,
say more why?
It's like it's ambrosia. Like it's just like a really good halva is like an orgasm for your mouth. Like
that's not a good marketing. Nobody should use that.
But maybe that doesn't make it the best because it's like it's too rich to have all the time,
Yeah.
But it's like it's either that or I'm just obsessed with hamantashen. So
yeah, absolutely. But halva, let's stay on halva because no one has said that. And ambrosia, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful way to put it. It is so intense. I feel like I couldn't have a halva more than a little bit.
Yeah.
At a time.
And actually, I have this memory, a thing I want to mention to you. So I went to Israel in 2009 on a Taglit birthright trip. And then it was a really powerful experience and a complicated experience. I felt propagandized too, but I also felt like this deep connection. And I've never really processed it. And I've never written about it. And this conversation, I've actually been thinking about it and thinking I should probably need to write about that. But I have this memory of being in the marketplace in Jerusalem and walking by this giant mountain of halva, this guy just handing me some. And it was the greatest thing I had ever tasted.
Right. The first bite's always free. Yeah. Well, listen, you are deeply in it as a new daddy and you take your time, but the world awaits your further work. I love your work as a writer. And I really appreciate the time you've given me. Love talking to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi Josh. It's great talking to you too.
Have a great one, man. Take care.
Until next time.
Yep.